Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living. My name is Paul Cuffee, and I am a licensed practitioner here. And it is my absolute joy and delight to be partnered with my cohort, Clarissa, Crowe, with whom we do all the cool things in media here, and our very lovely and special guest, Takako Terino, who is, among other things, an ordained Presbyterian minister, a chaplain at the Mandela School and for APD, as well as the Presbytery in Santa Fe, and my personal mentor in the formation of spiritual direction. Part of the reason we're having you as a guest is because throughout the whole year, we're going to be exploring the principle and concept of all paths lead home. There's a variety of spiritual practices and paths and beliefs and traditions that all sorts of people find their way to based upon their own affinity, their history, what interests them, what excites them. And our fundamental belief is that all of them are good. All of them lead us back to the center, which is the one, which is God, which is spirit. It's especially exciting to have somebody such as yourself, Takako, who comes from a very traditional background, but from what I'm familiar with, has a very, very broad and all-encompassing view of spirituality. And I just invite you to speak to that.
Thank you. Yes, I'm coming from a very traditional in one sense, in that Presbyterian Church USA that ordained me, and Presbyterian PCUSA for short, is my context for ministry. But at the same time, it's that denomination is a traditional mainline Protestant. But I also come untraditional in a way that I was born and raised in Japan, where the Christianity is only less than 1%. And I'm a third generation on my maternal side, raised in church. And my first pastor in Japan was a woman pastor. So my journey has been growing up as a religious minority in Japan, growing up just breathing the air that is a kind of mixture of Confucianism, Buddhism, Shintoism. And I never worried about my non-Christian friends, going to hell or anything like that. Then I came to this country and I was introduced to a whole new landscape of religion. So it has been, one word I picked up, Paul, you said the theme was all path leads home. And for me, that is a key, home. Whatever that spiritual path or religious affiliation, for me, it is the home. No matter what religious tradition you were raised, and we are all lead to home, to Creator, the parent. And yeah, so that's the way I sit.
That's beautiful. One of the things that we're exploring throughout the month of February, we're talking about do-overs and how that's not really about do-overs. There is no doing over. There is a newness, a doing new, but we don't do over. We just deepen. We go into a deeper place of practicing the presence and growing in awareness. And I just was wondering, another thing that we do speak to in this particular subject is sacred silence. And I was wondering what your thoughts might be around those things, especially as a spiritual director. And maybe tell us a little bit about what being a spiritual director is.
I agree. I understand what you mean by there's no do-over, but always almost like a new beginning. But it's not a brand new beginning. It's a building upon the path we have walked. And I remember when I was graduating from college, in upstate New York. I came to this country from high school. So when I was graduating, this one quote from Dag Hammarskjöld. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations earlier time when the world was full of conflict. And many of his saying is recorded in the book markings. One quote said, "You will know life and be acknowledged by it, by the degree of your transparency, your capacity, that is, to banish as an end and remain purely as means." Now, I had no idea, but I just knew that was the spiritual guiding, kind of my North Star. And Dag Hammarskjöld was a person of faith, and his public service was driven with his relationship with his creator. And for me, the do-over is at every juncture of my life, I have come to deeper meaning, like unpacking that quote, that saying. And as I spent my professional life in New York City as an interpreter, I'm a language person, interpreter and translator between Japanese but then there was a time I made a decision to follow my call and went to seminary, and I was immersed in theology. And all these things led me to have deeper understanding, but it was when I was introduced to the world of spiritual direction, which for me was the same thing as my introduction to the contemplative life, where all this thing that I have acquired, I realized I needed to set it aside. Now it was time for me to set it aside to create the place, sacred silence. And setting aside doesn't mean I forget it all. I know it's all just like a life experience, all the knowledge, all the training, it's there with you, but that's not what brings you to the presence and the real experience of the divine. And for me, sometimes I wonder why wasn't I led to the contemplative life earlier? But then at the same time, it's kind of, there's no point in asking, because of I have done so many do-overs, I have done so many curves. Now that I can really see and be open to just sit and place myself in this place of silence. So for me, the spiritual direction is a combination of sitting in silence as if all other things are not I'm not leaning on all these other things, but it's all there. I don't need to worry about losing my experience. It's there, it's God-given for me. It's like exciting adventure into the world that's quite new to me, actually.
I guess it speaks to, we always get to choose again, huh? We always get to, because it's not a do-over, but a start fresh, a start new. We always get to choose. There's always the pause, the reflection, and the action. Huh?
Yeah, and in that newness, what is new is at the same time you have to let go of what you thought was the answer. For me, there was a time I was saved by Reformed theology, and I'm very committed to my Presbyterian as a denomination, but realizing God or spirit is always drawing you. And all this context is always context that feeds me for the time, but it is not the same thing as home, where we are being led to.
That's powerful. What do you think talk to us about joy, about desire, and how it dovetails with mysticism, perhaps, and the whole idea of embodying this experience, this sense of oneness, do you have a relationship with that? Is that something you identify with?
For me, that's the newest do-over for me, joy and desire. Because several years ago, concurrent to my move from New York City to Albuquerque, it was a transition for me to let go of my secular career that earned me, decent living where I could raise my family, to transition into doing chaplaincy training here at the Presbyterian Hospital. And it coincided with who was then my ex-husband's terminal diagnosis. And even though we had been divorced for 8 years, we were always family. We were a really tight unit. And he decided that I was going to be the one that he was going to trust me, trust his life with. So I came to Albuquerque 6 years ago with a dying husband. And we had been kind of center of each other. So I journeyed what I will feel like it was his journey back home. If I can use my faith language, heavenly home. He had been lost. He had a really complicated relationship with his creator, and it was laying heavily on him. And it was like really journey home, and it was a remarkable walk. But when he finally departed this earth, I felt like my mission was done. I walked with him. I felt like everything that we had lived together was just for that moment, so I can give him a good send-off. Now he's departed. What's left? I was a person of faith, so I knew I would still live, right? So long as I have this God-given breath every morning, I will have work to do. But one thing I felt clear, I did not think I would ever experience joy. And it was, I did not even fall into depression or anything like that. But I just did not, something that was most important, that was central in my life, had been not taken away, but it was done, So there was something in me kind of died with that. So that was a situation I never experienced, that I would not have any desire or joy. And that is when I started the chaplaincy program that was introduced to spiritual direction and this contemplative life of falling back into kind of darkness. And so I sat there for a long, long time. And when the joy started to come, I know I did not reach for it. It was coming from somewhere beyond me. So all I could do was just be open to it. I wasn't angry, mad at God for taking away, the source of my joy, or I just knew it could not come from within me. Or maybe it's within me, but not in that, within the realm of my conscious self,
It was in your heart, not your head.
Yeah, and I think the source of joy, like I would believe, I'm a pastor, so I tell people, God wants you to have a joyous life. God wants you to live a life abundant. And it was like, yeah, I believe that for everybody, but I didn't expect it from me, having experienced what I had. But it did started to come, and I know it had to come from deeper place than my own consciousness. I did not make a decision to reclaim joy. So whatever, depending on your faith language, whether it comes from above but it was from beyond my conscious self. And the mysticism and contemplative life taught me there was such place that was beyond my own small self-consciousness, and something that is sacred and holy is happening in that realm beyond. So I now try to make myself consciously open to that space. I'm still learning how to walk that walk.
That's the mystical practice, though, yeah?
Yeah, that's the practice, yeah.
To that space. That's the deal. I think that I know that for myself, there was a point early in my journey where I thought, there's allegories about it and Sufi tales about, the devout mystic travels the path to the door beyond which the divine resides. And he knocks on the door and he knocks, and the divine answers from within, "Who's there?" And he says, it's me, I'm here. And the divine says, "Go away, there's no room for you." And this happened several times. Finally, the mystic's an old and tired and just worn out from this journey. And he gets to the door and he knocks. And inside, the beloved, the divine, responds, "Who's there?" And he says, "It is thee." And the door opens. And I think that, it's surrender, right? It's just like letting go of all that you thought, all that you believed, all that you think you knew, and allowing, like you said, for it to just come and bring you to it, instead of you trying to force your way there.
And that's for me, the do-over part would be at that moment when the door opens. Again, my Christian language, by grace of God, right? By the power of the grace, you take that courageous step into you squeaky open, door squeaks open, and you take that step into that, exactly. Trusting you are being led into that direction.
This is wonderful, and I'm so appreciative of you being here and all of these wonderful insights about it being about the journey and not the destination, and all of our experiences being part of our wholeness that leads us to those deeper levels of awareness. And then this beautiful thing about that intimate relationship with the divine that we get to find in the silence when we surrender that small sense of self to that something bigger, and opening to that joy and that higher love that's available always for all of us, no matter what our experiences have been. So yes, thank you for your insights on that.
It's interesting too, because some of our particular language speaks very specifically to small self and big self. And I'm not even sure if you're familiar with that, but you use that phrase, which, goes right back to how this conversation got started about all paths leading home, even our language. And for what it's worth, Reverend Ramani likes to remind people, I think partially to stir people up and also to just let them know that in the very beginning of the practice of religious science, we are and were a biblically, a Christian-based practice that has grown and evolved and, shaped and changed and all the things. And we are inherently, in so much as mysticism speaks to experiential relationship with spirit, we are inherently a mystical practice. And so for you to bring this traditional perspective, and yet to be speaking exactly the same language we speak with different words, is really, it's pretty glorious. I really appreciate you for doing that. It means a lot. It speaks to the notion of difference and sameness. You know, it's like we are all different, but we're all one. You know, there's that song, that U2 song, we are one, but we are not the same.
We've got to carry each other.
Got to carry each other. And, you know, the idea of that's a little incomprehensible to a lot of people, I think. I think the notion that, you know, we are one, and we're not the same. And we're going to have differences of viewpoint, differences of practice, differences of, you know, Amani said something about, you know, she was referencing Jesus, actually, and that Jesus spoke to, you know, having absolute devotion to the ineffable, were her words. You know, the first two commandments, love God and love your neighbor. That's the whole of it. That's all of it. You do that and you're good. And, you know, the Bible also speaks to, you know, it's not a big deal to love your brother. You know, you love your enemy. And Amani speaks to, you know, you mean I have to, like, you know, have union with the white supremacists? I have to have union with, you know, the guy who voted for the guy that nobody really wanted around. And she lists this whole, you know, sequence of people that somebody is not going to have favor with. And the answer is yes. It's like, you know, you don't have to have dinner with these folks. You may not like them, but you have to love them. You really do. You have to go to this place where, you know, you understand what love is and you mean it. And you really do love your neighbor as you love yourself. You don't have to like them. You may not like them at all. You may never want to hang out with them, but you have to love them. You have to wish for them the best that they could possibly have for themselves. You know, that in our world, the world of, you know, Centers for Spiritual Living, we talk about a world that works for everyone. And a world that works for everyone is everyone, because everyone is everyone. It's not everyone except or everyone but. It's everyone. And I just, you know, a lot of what you say really speaks to that.
And I think even though love is the uniting energy, right? Loving individuals that are different. What does that loving experience of loving white supremacist? What is the experience of loving somebody who breaks into your house and invades your privacy, and, you know, all these people who are hostile to you or seems to destruct? Loving experience of loving not people who are engaged in the moment would be very different. You know, all the love doesn't feel the same. I think loving for me, you know, Nancy Pelosi was saying, I pray for President Trump when President Trump was still, you know, and I think it's with a broken, painful, bleeding heart. Yeah. So love is uniting force, but how we experience it, how the energy leaves us, feels different. And it has to be, right? Sometimes the love is very easy to flow and it kind of comes back, you know, when that mutuality of love that's evoked in the Song of Solomon, you know, Song of Songs. And but sometimes loving someone, it's painful.
Yeah.
And there's flavors of love, right? I mean, I think that's a TV show too. But there's eros, agape, philos, you know, fraternal love. And I think there's obviously space for all of those. Agape, that transcendent, all-encompassing, you know, I will love you regardless love. And there is the passionate, desirous, feeling, sensual love that you feel, you know, when you're really like connected to somebody on a like/love level. And there's, you know, the love of, there is that, you know, I love my work. I love to create. I love, you know, these words that have been written. I love humanity. I love horses, dogs, whatever. So there are ranges of love, yeah. And not that any of them are not love. any more than, you know, rice is food just like oranges are and just like, you know, vegetables are. And yet they're not all the same food.
Valerie Kaur talks about, in her revolutionary love movement, about loving others, loving ourselves, and loving our opponents. And she really talks about love as a labor. You know, it's an action, and that really causes us to break open. Like when I was hearing you just now, Takako, it's like, it's not easy. That kind of, especially the loving our opponents, really requires us to let our hearts break open. So rather than be closed down by somebody doing something harmful to me, I'm gonna let my heart actually open up. And that kind of love isn't like a hearts and flowers kind of love. It's fierce. And it takes so much courage and so much strength to stay in that place of love in the face of those kinds of things.
Sidestep a little bit. I had a conversation. A friend of mine took me to the, I think it's called the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice or something to that effect. They do good work. They do really good work. They work hard. They feed people every week. They're involved in a lot of great things. And we were having this conversation, and the director whom I had met, asked me what my relationship to peace was. And it was in the context of, you know, the socio-political context. It wasn't like inner peace or any of that. It was like, you know, looking at the world. And I was like, you know, I'm far less interested in peace than I am in freedom. If we're looking at a socio-political context, and also on a spiritual level, I was like, for me, freedom is far more important than peace. Peace is a choice each individual has to make for themselves. Freedom is an institutional. It is in consciousness for sure, because in my mind everything begins there. But from a, you know, macro consciousness level, it's an institutional thing. And I realized that I was in a way contradicting myself when I thought about it, not so much about the peace part, but about that, you know, true spiritual awakening is liberation. It is freedom. You know, I reflected on, Mandela is a great example. Nelson Mandela is, like, to me, in this context, the ultimate example of what freedom in consciousness really represents. Because he was 28 years in Robben's Island, and he came out stronger than when he went in. You know, in the harshest conditions you could possibly imagine. Went into solitary confinement for 28 years and came out, you know, an avatar. And that speaks to freedom. And I was just wondering, you know, for you, Kako, what does that mean to you? What are your thoughts about that?
These big words, right? Peace, freedom, love. It's really hard to articulate because well, it's a noun, right? Language, label. It's always only our best attempt, right? Our best attempt to communicate something. And when we have these big words, everybody has certain assumptions that they already have. So communicating that is really, really hard. So I need to go back to my own experience of freedom or lack thereof, right? And speak from that and see if you can understand what I mean.
That's all we ever have anyway, right?
Right. And for me, growing up like my religious minority, being Christian, it's not that Christians are nowadays persecuted. I mean, there was a time in our history, you know, they had to go underground and they were persecuted. But for me, the Christianity brought me my first sense of freedom because I was born into and growing up in a very male-centered society. And the gender role, from the very early on, there's a gender role and the gender expectations. And I had my mom was a Christian. My father was from the lineage of samurai, which really valued education even for the girls. Like I say even because in Japan, in my adulthood, we had politicians in Japan saying the mistake of the government was we allowed women to be educated. Look, the birth rate is going down. And this is in my adulthood, right? And I thought only older generation were thinking that we just needed to just wait for them to die out. Then I would hear mayor of Osaka, who's 10 years younger than me, saying the same thing. So I grew up in that cultural context. So for me, I was raised knowing I am a child of God, first and foremost. Before I was a Japanese, before I was a girl, I think that was the first value that was instilled in me by this woman pastor of the church that I was raised in, when my mom was the pillar of the church. So I feel responsibility because I felt like I was so lucky to have this sense of freedom that I did not allow the social expectation that came with my gender to, and thanks to my father who was not restricted by that, to experience freedom that I have as a child of God, but it was embedded in that. And if that was true for me, and if it was the truth, it had to be truth for everybody. So my sense of freedom and equality is based on my spiritual experience that I am, as well as everyone who has a breath on this earth is a child of God. And that is what claims you. So that's my experience of freedom and the ground of my freedom. Now, how would that play out when I put myself in a political, specific historical political time? It looks different, right? But whatever the cause I would be advocating will be going back to that experience.
For me, this whole experience that we're having right now is a lesson in expectations, such that I had really distinct expectations that this would be a lovely experience we would have having this conversation, and I was blown away. So either to learn to have no expectations or to expect a lot more.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I haven't really, it's not something you consciously think about and try to articulate. So this is very enriching experience for me too.
Oh, yeah. Do you have a pulpit? Do you preach anywhere? Do you do anything?
So that's the thing. Being a chaplain, right? Usually, if you're a pastor, you have a congregation.
Right.
But being a chaplain, my community is Menal School. That's my full-time. My calling, my official installed position as a Presbyterian church is the full-time school chaplain at Menal School. Right now, we are a very diverse community in terms of socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural. It's a privilege for me to be able to hold that kind of spiritual quality of a spiritual center for the community, but everybody's all over the place. It started out as a Presbyterian school by Presbyterian church, and we are no longer a Presbyterian school in a sense that St. Pius is a Catholic school. They belong to Catholic church. We don't belong to church, but we have a covenantal relationship when it comes to when I speak about certain social issues, for example, of inclusion, or of respecting every faith, faith heritage. I can lean back on where the Presbyterian Church stands. Unfortunately, Presbyterian Church has been reforming. We believe in reforming ourselves and we continue on that path. So it's my identity as a Presbyterian clergy is important for me because it gives me the grounding as I do chaplaincy ministry on this very diverse, often messy and could be tricky, community. So right now we have, because of the pandemic, we are limited, but we have a Facebook, school Facebook, and we have amazing advancement office staff who try to do the reaching out. And I hope that, there's an opportunity in the future for collaboration.
That would be beautiful. And I guess this is an opportunity we can both make an invitation to some of the things that Still Point offers. Still Point, the spiritual direction formation program that I'm currently involved in, and that you are a recent graduate of. And I said earlier, you're my mentor in that program.
And I don't know, Paul, how much you have browsed on their website, but they have contemplative practice, like daily prayer. People can join in. And also they have a program for those who wants to cultivate contemplative practice in the community, but not necessary to get trained to become spiritual director. So there's a program. I was like really surprised to find the breadth of programs that they offer.
Yeah.
And they also have a, one-off monthly retreat for different topics. And
yeah, I have been actually, it's all about bandwidth, right? The amount of time we have to devote to anything. But I have browsed and looked into it. And a few friends from our community, from the community of the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living, have embarked on a little bit of a deeper dive into their own practice from becoming familiar with it. It's, stillpoint.org. And that is a wonderful place to
and did you know the second name of Still Point? I think it's still true. It's a Still Point, and it had comma, and it's Center for Christian Spirituality. So that's why it's a Christian oriented, but they are very explicit about learning, not just welcoming, but embracing and learning from all faiths.
Well, thank you, Takako. It's always a delight to share this type of time with you. I look forward to doing it more often. And
yes, thank you.
Greatly appreciate you being here. Would you like to send us off with a prayer?
Sure. One who is with us, who will be with us, even as after we go our own way. We give you thanks for your weaving hands, weaving each lives that you have given birth to this place, and in an intricate way that we can never imagine, that leads to such richness. Thank you for this time and space we were able to share. I pray for your guidance upon each one of us sharing this space, this time, until you call us again together. May it be so. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Takako.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's an honor.